Before beginning the story, I'd like to say a big thank you for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading alternate history-related stories every single day. If that sounds good, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a whole lot when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. Nobody noticed the first one right away, which should tell you something about how people move through a city. They look at their phones, they look at the road ahead, they look at anything that needs their immediate attention. A stone monument on a park path is easy to walk past, especially if it looks like it's always been there. I noticed it because noticing things is my job. My name is Rue, and I work parks maintenance for the city. I mow, I mulch, I replace broken benches and fix irrigation lines, and spend a lot of time on my knees in the dirt, keeping grass alive through summer heat. I've worked every public green space in this city at some point over the past 11 years. I know the parks the way you know a house you've lived in a long time. Not because I memorize them, but because I've been hands deep in the details for so long that anything out of place registers before I've even thought about it. The first monument appeared in Caldwell Park on a Thursday morning in early October. It was about 4 feet tall, rectangular, cut from a grey stone that had the particular worn look of something very old. The surface was smooth in the way stone gets after decades of rain and hard winters. There was an iron plaque on the front, oxidized green at the edges, and the whole thing sat back just slightly off the main walking path, settled into the grass at the bend near the east tree line. Clover and creeping thyme had grown thick around its base, the kind of established growth that takes years to fill in that way. I crouched down and read the plaque. In memory of those lost in the Caldwell Fire, October 1987. May the names of the fallen be carried forward. Below that, a column of names, maybe 30 of them. I searched for the Caldwell Fire on my phone. Nothing came up. I tried different search terms, checked the city's historical records database, looked through old news archives. There was no fire in 1987. Not in this park, not in this neighborhood, not anywhere in the city's documented history. I walked around the monument and checked the back. Just stone and a hairline crack running up from the base. I reported it to my supervisor, Bet, who figured it was an unauthorized installation. It happened sometimes. A family or community group placing a memorial without going through the permitting process. She told me to photograph it and submit an inquiry. The inquiry came back empty. No permits, no contractor, no record of any installation. The ground around the base showed no signs of recent digging. A structural assessor the city brought in said the weathering on the stone was consistent with 30 to 50 years of outdoor exposure. He had no explanation for that. Bet told me to leave it and said she'd escalate. I left it and moved on with my week. By the following Monday, there were 4 more. They were spread across 3 different parks, each one built the same way. Old stone, weathered plaque, plants rooted in around the base like they'd been there for decades. Each one marked something different. A flood in a neighborhood that had never flooded. A building collapse on a street where every building was still standing. A bridge failure on a crossing that had never failed. Specific dates, specific casualty numbers, specific names carved in neat columns below each event. None of it existed in any record anywhere. The names on the plaques were the part that started pulling at me. I recognized some of them, not from history books or news stories, from the city itself. Living people, the man who ran the hardware store on Birch Avenue, a woman I'd seen at community board meetings, a few names from the neighborhood where I grew up. Then I found my own name. It was on the 5th monument near the east entrance of Harmon Green. The plaque read, "In memory of those lost in the Harmon Green collapse, June 2019. 2/3 of the way down the list of names, in the same carved lettering as all the others, was mine. Full name, middle initial correct. I stood there reading it over and over. It's not an uncommon name, but the initial matched, and this was my park, and I was well past the point of comfortable explanations. I went home that night and sat in my kitchen for a long time. More monuments appeared, 2 or 3 a week, then more. The city issued a statement calling them unauthorized installations and promising an investigation. Local news picked it up. Online, people started treating it like a quirky mystery, a tourist attraction, something to photograph and post. Nobody could explain where they were coming from, how they were being placed without witnesses, without any evidence of disturbed ground. I kept doing my rounds. I had 17 monuments in my parks by early November, and my job had quietly shifted from maintenance to monitoring. Bet gave me a checklist to fill out each time a new one appeared. It gave me something to do with the unease that had settled in my chest. The unease got worse when the ground started changing. The fountain in Caldwell Park cracked down the middle, a deep, clean split that hadn't been there the day before. Not settling damage, not freeze damage. The crack ran directly through the spot where, according to the Caldwell fire plaque, the worst of the casualties had been concentrated. I filed a repair report and kept moving. 2 weeks later, a storage shed at the edge of Harmon Green simply wasn't there anymore. Not vandalized, not demolished, gone. The concrete pad it had sat on was still there, but cracked and heaved up, as if something heavy had come down on it a long time ago, and grass had grown up through the cracks in a way that took years. I had photographs of that shed from a routine inspection 3 weeks prior. Bet had no explanation. The city had no explanation. The shed was removed from the asset inventory as a clerical anomaly, and that was the end of it officially. I started to understand what I was looking at. The monuments weren't just markers. They were the leading edge of something. Where they stood, the ground beneath was slowly becoming something else. The ground of a city that had been taken apart piece by disasters that had never happened here. Foundations failing, structures disappearing. The parks I'd spent 11 years maintaining quietly becoming the wreckage of a version of themselves I'd never seen. The city was being replaced, slowly, and from underneath. I found Aldrich on a Tuesday night in the 3rd week of November. I'd started doing late walks through the parks after my shift. Not officially, not with any sanction from Bet or the city. I just couldn't stop. I'd lie in bed thinking about the shed, about the crack in the fountain, about my name on that plaque, and eventually I'd get up and drive back out. That Tuesday, I was walking the south path of Caldwell when I heard something in the tree line, a scraping sound, low and rhythmic, the sound of something heavy being dragged through grass. I cut across the lawn toward it and found a man in the dark, working alone. He was older, maybe 60, lean in the way people get when they've been through something long and depleting. He was setting a monument into the ground with a focused, practiced efficiency that made it clear he'd done this dozens of times. The monument was already upright, already settled, and even in the few seconds I stood there watching, the ground around the base seemed to be closing in around it, the grass threading up along the stone like it was being pulled rather than growing. I said his name without thinking because I'd heard it from one of the people I talked to at a community board meeting. Someone who'd pointed out a monument near their building and mentioned offhand that a man matching this description had been seen in the area the night before it appeared. He turned around. He wasn't startled. He looked at me with an expression that was tired and certain in equal measure, the way someone looks when they've been expecting a particular conversation for a long time and are relieved it's finally arrived. "Yoru," he said. He glanced towards the south path, in the direction of the Harmon Green Monument. "I know your name." I told him I knew. We sat on a bench at the edge of the park. He talked for a long time, and I listened, because there wasn't much else to do at that point. Aldrich was from here, from this city, from these streets, from neighborhoods I knew by name and drove through regularly. But not this version of them. In the world he came from, the city had been coming apart for 30 years. It started with a warehouse fire in the late 80s that took out a full block of Caldwell and killed 31 people. Then a flood that overwhelmed the drainage infrastructure and sat in the lower neighborhoods for 3 weeks. A parking structure collapse on a busy Saturday afternoon. A bridge that failed on a January morning during rush hour. Each disaster separated by years, none of them connected by any single cause, just a city having the kind of sustained bad luck that breaks a place slowly instead of all at once. By the time Aldrich was in his 40s, the city he grew up in was mostly memory. Neighborhoods that had been full of people were vacant lots and boarded windows. The parks, my parks, were cracked concrete and dead grass and memorial plaques installed by whoever was left to install them. He was the last of the people who had placed those plaques in his world. Everyone else had moved away or died or simply stopped being findable. He'd spent years maintaining the memorials, the same way I spent years maintaining the parks, because it was the work that was in front of him, and he didn't know what else to do with himself. Then he found a way across. He didn't explain the mechanics of it to me, and I didn't push him, partly because I didn't think I'd understand it, and partly because I'm not sure it mattered. What mattered was what he'd decided to do with it. He looked at me steadily when he said the next part, like he wanted to make sure I understood before I responded. He believed the people whose names were on those plaques deserved to know what their counterparts had survived or hadn't survived. He believed that the men and women living in this intact, unbroken version of the city were carrying a history they didn't know about, and that the monuments were a way of giving that history back to them. He said it like a person describing an act of generosity. His voice was quiet and completely sincere. I asked him about the ground, about the fountain, about the shed at Harmon Green. He went still. I told him what I'd been watching happen for the past 6 weeks. The damage appearing at the sites, the structures disappearing. I told him about the crack running through the exact spot the Caldwell fire plaque marked as the center of the casualties. I told him that the city I worked in was being quietly hollowed out and replaced with a version of itself that had already been destroyed. He didn't say anything for a long time. When he spoke, he said he hadn't known. He said it slowly, each word separate, like he was testing the weight of it. He said the monuments in his world had just been stone and metal and carved names. He hadn't understood they were carrying anything else with them. I believed him. That was the worst part of the conversation. I believed him completely. He asked me what I wanted him to do. I told him to stop, to take them down if he could, or to stop placing new ones and let the city deal with the existing ones however it was going to. He nodded. He looked at his hands. He said he thought he could pull them back, the ones that hadn't been in the ground long. The older ones, the ones with established growth, he wasn't sure about. I asked him about mine, the one with my name on it. He looked up at me. There was something in his expression I couldn't quite name. Not guilt, not pity. Something more like recognition. The way you look at a person when you realize they've understood something you never expected them to understand. He told me that in his world, I had been one of the first people lost in the Harmon Green collapse. He said I'd been doing my rounds when the structure failed, and that the city had held a small service, and that several of the people I'd worked with over the years had spoken. He said it like he was giving me something, a gift I hadn't asked for and didn't know what to do with. I sat with that for a moment. Then I told him again to stop, to go back to wherever he came from and leave this city alone, not harshly, not with any anger I hadn't already burned through on the walk over. I said it like a man who was very tired and wanted to go home and sleep without dreaming about cracked foundations. He stood up from the bench. He picked up the tools he'd been using, a few simple things, nothing elaborate, and he held them at his side and looked out across the park. The monument he'd been placing when I found him was fully settled now, stone and plaque and a ring of clover already threading around the base. In the dark. "I'll pull what I can," he said. Then he walked off into the tree line and was gone. Most of them disappeared over the following 2 weeks. Not all at once, 2 or 3 at a time, gone between my evening round and my morning round, the same way they'd arrived. The ground where they'd stood recovered quickly, too quickly, the same way the growth had appeared too quickly, operating on a timeline that didn't follow any rule I understood. Within a week of each removal, the grass was unbroken, no trace remaining. The fountain crack filled in. I watched it happen over the course of 4 days, the split closing by degrees, the concrete knitting back together. I didn't photograph it. I didn't document it. I just watched. The shed at Harmon Green didn't come back. The cracked pad was still there, and the grass growing up through it, and no amount of anything was going to restore what had been there before. I put in a report recommending a new storage structure and left it at that. 14 of the 17 monuments came down. The city catalogued their absence the same way it had catalogued their presence, which is to say, without any real explanation, just an entry in a database and a note that the matter was considered resolved, pending further review. 3 remained. I checked on them in the weeks after Aldrich left. They were the oldest of the lot, the ones with the deepest root growth, the most weathered faces, the plaques most thoroughly greened over. Whatever he'd tried with them hadn't taken. They were in the ground to stay. One of them was mine. The city put up signs near the remaining 3 that said, "Historical Monument, do not disturb," which was a reasonable thing to do when you had no other category for something. People still stopped to read the plaques. Some of them took photographs. On a few occasions, I watched someone read the names and pause at one, going quiet in the particular way a person goes quiet when they see their own name, somewhere they didn't expect to find it. I never stopped them. I never explained. I didn't know how I would have started. It's February now, and I'm still doing my rounds. The parks are quiet in winter. Bare trees and hard ground, and the particular grey light that sits over everything from November to March. The monuments that remain have accumulated a thin skin of frost on the plaques in the mornings, and I check them the same way I check everything else, not looking for anything in particular, just looking. I think about Aldrich sometimes. I think about the version of this city he came from, the 30 years of bad luck and slow collapse. The parks I know turned into fields of cracked concrete and dead grass. I think about the people who'd placed the memorials in that world and what it must have cost them to do it. And I think about Aldrich maintaining those memorials alone after everyone else was gone, which is a kind of dedication I recognize, even if I can't call it healthy. I think about what he said about my counterpart, the service the city held, the people who spoke. I don't know what to do with that. It's not grief exactly, because you can't grieve a version of yourself you never were. It's something quieter than grief. More like the feeling of standing at a window on a cold morning and watching a street, look briefly like somewhere else, and then resolve back into itself, and not being entirely sure which version was real. The monument with my name is in the east corner of Harmon Green, set back from the walking path, the plaque facing toward the open lawn. Some mornings when I come in early, I sit on the bench across from it with my coffee and read the names. I know a few of them now, not from the other timeline, but from this one. People I've worked with or waved to or seen enough times that their faces are familiar. The city will probably remove it eventually. There's a process, a committee, a series of approvals. It'll happen slowly, the way city things happen slowly. And then one morning, it'll be gone, and the ground will close over where it stood. Until then, nobody touches it, including me.